Hi, everyone, and welcome to Humane Voices, the official podcast of the Humane Society of the United States. You asked for helpful info on what foods your dogs and cats can eat. Well, you've probably asked Google more than us, but still, you got it. We are going to tell you about what foods to avoid giving your dog or cat. Some of these are harmless and others are deadly. Some of these are pretty serious stuff. Just want to remind everybody that when we're talking about this, we're talking about kind of the highlights. This is not a comprehensive list of things that you should or should not be feeding your dogs or cats, but we thought it was interesting nonetheless. Carrie, the idea for this episode, it's been lingering for a while, but with so many stories of dogs eating cicadas, we had to talk about this now. I feel like it was very timely. I don't know how far across the country we've seen the cicadas, but they're, especially in the DC area, they have been everywhere. So now
they have been directly in my backyard. Let me tell you, our Pomeranian Chihuahua mix, who is a really picky eater and will not eat, gourmet items, all of a sudden discovered his appetite during the cicada outbreak. It was unbelievable. Like this dog who turns his nose up about all sorts of foods. Like we have a really hard time getting him to eat. He would go outside and he would see these cicadas and he was just going to town. It was like a Vegas buffet, I swear. And it was really disturbing to watch because he's a small dog and he would have this enormous bug in his mouth. And sometimes it was still flapping as he was, I was just like, not only feeling bad for the bug, but just like really worried about, how was it safe? Was it okay for him to eat them? And we kept trying to sort of like grab him before he would get one, but he was speedy.
Prized delicacy.
It was, seriously. And I mean, there was an unfortunate moment for me where I did wake up in some unfortunate dog emesis that was contained a lot of cicada parts. It was a very fun morning where I woke up cold and moist and was like, why am I cold and moist? And then discovered the reason for being cold and moist and was like, why do we have dogs? I don't remember. There's a reason, but I don't remember what it is.
Honestly, Floof wanted to share this special moment with you.
Yes,
so
it was
honestly,
a very special moment.
But anyway, so it's a perfect time to kind of talk about this. What was good or what is not good for Floof and other dogs and cats that we have. Our guest on the show today is Dr. Cy Woon, a practicing veterinarian who is also the Florida representative for the Humane Society Veterinary Medical Association. Thank you so much, Dr. Woon, for sitting down to chat with us. We're so glad you're here. And after a very interesting evening that you've had. Thank you so much for even joining us after quite a night.
I am so glad I could be here after that evening, that eventful evening that I
what happened?
had not anticipated. Well, it always seems to happen to me because all my friends, colleagues, they know that I love rescue. And so inevitably, if an injured animal of some kind is found, I am the first port of call. So yesterday afternoon, I got a message from a friend mentioning that she has come across a duck on the side of a road. It's a juvenile duck and it can't move, it can't walk. It's just flapping its wings and looks injured. She suspected it had been run over by a car, or at least hit by a car. So inevitably, I did end up going there, even though I was about to head out to a date down in Miami. Dates can be postponed, but if there's an injured, paralyzed duckling, I can't help but rush there. So thankfully, the duckling in question was still alive when I arrived. I was able to pick him up and place him in a carrier. Thankfully, I also work with and help out a rescue. So I was able to access their medical room and provide some emergency care. So the duckling did survive the night, thankfully, but it was even more of an eventful night because I had to bring him to emergency at 3 a.m. in the morning.
Oh my God.
Yes,
wow.
So I was having some open mouth breathing. I was really concerned about some lung damage, especially with the potential car accident. But thankfully, he is doing fine now. He's been stabilized.
Well, it also helps you assess the character of the date, right? Because if they're upset that you're saving a duckling, you know, that's not the one for you.
That's a good measure. In fact, if I ever have future alternative dates, I'll just make up a story and use that as a judging factor.
Right. It sounds like you won't even have to make them up since they happen all the time.
It is true. It happens all too frequently to me.
Well, we thought, Dr. Woon, that we'd start with kind of a fun segment on the show, because you've had so much experience in these good or bad things for animals that we're eating. Setting the scene here, of course, all of us animal owners, we're at the dinner table, and our furry companions looking at us like they haven't been fed for weeks, and you're like, okay, I'll give them something. Oh, wait, I have to Google that and see what's going on. Or you panic Google because you come home and someone like Floof is gotten into something, and you're like, oh my gosh, do I have to take him to the vet? So what we're gonna do on the show, the segment is called Google Autocomplete Game. So we're gonna give you, Carrie will start off. We typed into Google, can dogs eat blank, and see what came up, and just see if we could do a quick rapid fire. Good,
Sounds
not
good.
so good for your pet. All right, Carrie,
okay.
You ready?
All right, yeah. So we'll start with the dogs one, and you know, I'll just say on my part, when I was previewing this and checking out some of the autocomplete entries, I was relieved to see that at least most of the things that people are searching for are at least foodstuffs. It's not like, can dogs eat Legos, or like, can dogs eat human flesh? That's really, that was a relief to me. So I was happy to see that. But there's some of these, you know, and I, you know, going through this, I was like, oh man, you know, these are mistakes that I have made in the past. And so, all right, so here we go. So the first ones, we know the answer to this, but the first one that came up, of course, very seasonal, is, can dogs eat cicadas?
Right. So that is that's going to be a mixed question in terms of the answer. I would not encourage you to feed cicadas to your pet. So please don't serve them up any cicadas, as much as they might desire them and as much as they are a delicacy. You know, they don't come around very often. But ideally, you'd want to avoid them. If your pet happens to consume a cicada or multiple, or I've had vet colleagues whose Labradors have just consumed copious amounts, like they are literally at a buffet. Yeah. So it can cause some indigestion because of the nature of the cicadas. They're not exactly smooth to digest. So they can certainly cause gastrointestinal upset, which you actually had the pleasure of experiencing.
I experienced directly, yes.
So that is just the main reason why we'd want to avoid them. In terms of toxicity and whether they're poisonous, they aren't really. They're not going to cause kidney failure, liver failure, or issues like that. But you know, you just want to avoid your pets eating them.
All right, good to know. All right, so next one is, can dogs eat strawberries?
Strawberries are fine. Many of the fruits are fine. I'm not going to say feed all fruits to your dog and all of them are safe. If your dog eats a strawberry, I wouldn't rush them to emergency. But it wouldn't be something that I'd incorporate as a huge part of their diet either. But a strawberry here and there is absolutely fine.
How about banana?
Banana is also absolutely fine. It does have a high sugar content. So that's the only reason you'd not want to give it regularly on a necessarily daily basis. But if you wanted to give it as a healthy treat now and then, you know, some dogs are really into their bananas. My dog has absolutely no interest in bananas. I've tested that out on her, but yeah, it's completely safe.
So strawberry banana smoothies might be okay.
Yeah, if you wanna slip a little bit of smoothie to your dog now and then, I wouldn't say that's going to be a disaster of any nature. But again, too much fruit can certainly cause indigestion.
All right, how about watermelon?
Watermelon, that's fine. That is not toxic. High water content. Again, it's just the sugar that we'd be concerned about. So don't overdo it on the watermelon.
Okay. I assume pineapple is the same, or is pineapple?
It is. It's quite acidic, and it's also very high in sugar. So, you know, if your dog happens to get into pineapple, I wouldn't be concerned at all, but I just wouldn't actively encourage feeding chunks of pineapple to your pets daily.
And this is the one, when I did the autocomplete, that I was like, oh, I know about this from past experience, is grapes. here's an exception,
yes,
right?
that is the one thing that I want all pet owners to be aware of. Grapes and also their counterparts, raisins and sultanas. I don't know if you use that term, sultanas, in America. That's an Australian word.
Yeah. I was actually gonna ask about your accent because I lived there for years and hearing you use sultana.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So those are definitely toxic. I would avoid at all costs. If your pet happens to consume either of those, I would definitely bring them to the emergency hospital right away. They can cause kidney failure. And I've had some really sad cases where clients had no idea. I had an elderly couple that just happened to feed their dog, a couple of grapes. And unfortunately, despite being treated at the emergency hospital, he didn't make it. He did go into kidney failure.
So awful.
And that's not something that's reversible. We don't have dialysis in pets, unfortunately.
So I think that people don't know that. Like, people, I think, generally know about chocolate. Like, that's a pretty commonly known thing now that you don't use dog's chocolate, but
absolutely, grapes and sultanas, raisins, they're the lesser known toxin, and I definitely would avoid. I've had friends that I've spoken to that have admitted they've happened to feed their dog a grape at some point and they had no idea about the repercussions.
That was me. That was me. When I had a dog probably 15 years ago that I used to occasionally just throw grapes to, and she would chase them, and she never seemed to experience any sort of ill effects from it. But I was wondering, when I later heard that it was not good for them, I was like, oh no, what kind of damage have I done to my dog? And was worried about her.
Some pets I think are really lucky, and some appear quite sensitive to the toxin. So definitely avoid.
Well, that's a good question, because I think that it's a good point that you raise. A lot of dogs, I feel like, react differently to different things. Like some dogs, my dog ate a bar of chocolate, or Carrie's dog has eaten grapes, whereas other dogs react instantly. So it's good to know that it might not have short-term effects, but could really be bad in the long term.
Definitely. And speaking of long-term, things like onions and garlic, they're considered cumulative. So you might feed your dog onions, for a month, but if you continue feeding for several months, then you're going to notice those really detrimental effects. Onions and garlic can cause anemia in pets. It can basically destroy the red blood cells.
Wow.
And obviously that's never a good thing, and it can be potentially fatal.
So I'm so glad you mentioned this one, because it's like, I remember seeing some pet treats that were listed as having garlic or onion in them, and when I saw them I was like, wait a minute, what is this about? Like, I thought these were bad for dogs.
Yes, that confounds me as well, because I would say if you ask any toxicologist, they would agree to avoid onions and garlic because of those ill effects. But I have also come across, I'm very conscious of what I give to my pets, and I always read the labels to make sure there's nothing untoward in there. But I've definitely seen treats with garlic in them. And I would say that's something that we should just all avoid.
Yeah, totally. Well, those were the top autocorrect or autocomplete ones for dogs. Austin, you want to go through the cat list?
Yeah, quickly we can run through these. For cats, can cats eat? Wondering, because there were a couple of overlapping searches here: cicadas, strawberries, and watermelon. Is that the same or different? Because it's
it's good to make that distinction as to whether there is a difference in how they process things, because there is certainly plants, foods, drugs that they're going to process differently, and what might be fatal in one pet could just be mildly distressing in another. So all of those fruits are certainly not toxic per se, but I would just not feed them intentionally to a cat. The other thing is, cats are quite picky with what they eat. Dogs are a little more indiscriminate, but they tend not to be the ones rushed into emergency as often as those Labradors, who just like to consume anything and everything. And cicadas, I would say cats. I mean, in South Florida, we didn't really experience the brunt of any of the cicadas, thankfully. So we didn't have these cases where clients are rushing in, having their dog just consumed 10 cicadas. But I would assume cats would be very excited about these cicadas.
Right.
Yeah. Exactly. And it's funny, I feel like these Google search palettes for cats and dogs, it's like dogs are like anything, and these cats are like charcuterie board of searches that were cheese. Can cats eat cheese, Dr.
Oh
Wu?
my gosh. Well, it's not toxic to them, and I know people who've given them cheese as treats, but it's not ideal. Some cats will be fine with it. They're not going to have GI symptoms, and others might have some diarrhea. So, there's always there's that myth that cats love milk. Give your cat a bowl
right
of,
in every
dish of
Disney
milk.
cartoon ever.
I was just about to say the cartoons. It's always the cartoons, right?
Yeah.
But I wouldn't actively encourage milk drinking in your cats.
It's great. What about peanut butter?
Peanut butter is fine as a treat for dogs, and I don't think any cats would even attempt to consume peanut butter. But for dogs, it is something that they as a majority, they do seem to love peanut butter. But then what I find happens is that people use peanut butter to give their dogs pills. And it's like, that's like, I swear every vet is like, just put it in peanut butter. So what happens is they then have an aversion to peanut butter because they associate it with the taste of their pills. So I've had multiple pets who, after that one time I used the peanut butter, they're like, I'm never consuming peanut butter again.
Yeah. I know what this is.
Right.
I wouldn't feed it in copious amounts just because of the fat content. I always try to inform clients about anything that's fatty. You really want to avoid in dogs and cats as well. It can lead to pancreatitis. Yeah. So,
all right. Yeah. Well, I mean, that really concludes kind of the segment here regarding, I mean, generally in your experience, though, we talked about it a little bit, but what are the most common cases that you see at your practice?
Right. So in practice, chocolate is definitely one that you want to avoid. It is more known, like you alluded to. So it's not quite as much of an issue, and they do have to consume quite an extensive amount of chocolate, and with a really high like cocoa content, so the dark chocolate, those are the ones that are more toxic. I mean, a lot of clients will rush into emergency because their dog just consumed like 2 Hershey Kisses. And, if it's a Labrador, they're probably going to be fine, but don't quote me on that. I always recommend that you should just bring them to emergency, because you just never know what could happen to your particular dog. Everyone's going to have, like we discussed earlier, somewhat of a different response. There's going to be all those individual differences between us. So, chocolate is a no-no for sure. Just avoid it. And then another one that I think a lot of clients and just people in general wouldn't be aware of is xylitol. So xylitol, have you guys
like gum and stuff, like sugar-free? It's like sugar-free gum and stuff. Yeah,
it is. Yeah, it's predominantly found in sugar-free gum. Also, whatever candy that's sugar-free, and even baked goods can have xylitol these days. The keto diet is just extremely popular at this time, and that is a sugar-free diet essentially. So there's a lot more products these days that I think are being marketed towards the keto diet.
Well, because those sweeteners, those sweeteners have xylitol, right?
It is a sweetener in itself.
Oh, it is.
Actually, it's kind of, the process of extracting it is actually quite natural. But what happens is if dogs even consume a small amount of xylitol, it rapidly decreases their blood sugar. Because it causes this rapid release of insulin in their blood, and then it's like a hypoglycemic, critical event. Their sugar drops so much, and they have to be absolutely, if your pet ever consumes any amount of xylitol, whether it's gum, candy, baked goods, they need to go straight to emergency. Because they need to have IV fluids and an infusion of dextrose to increase their sugar levels, because it's critical.
So just out of curiosity, I think this is kind of an older one, but I was just curious if it's still an issue. But when I was growing up, I feel like one of the big things they would warn pet owners about was antifreeze. But I think has that been addressed now? I felt like at some point maybe they started adding something to antifreeze that would make it less tasty.
There's that, but there's also the fact that like people seem just more aware about it being a toxin. So we don't really come across that as often. I would say if you ask 10 vets, that probably wouldn't be in their top 5 list. but definitely something to be aware of for sure.
Interesting, yeah.
In the springtime, we put out a lot of, you know, on our social media about types of flowers that might be harmful to your animal. What flowers are an absolute no-go?
I would say a key one that is still not very well known is lilies. Do not bring, if you have a cat, please just avoid lilies. You don't just choose tulips, roses, just the lilies, tiger lilies. They can cause kidney failure in cats, and every part of the plant is toxic. So even if your cat happens to brush past the lilies on your countertop, if there's pollen on their fur and they start grooming themselves a little later on, it is toxic. They can potentially go into kidney failure, and as we mentioned earlier, that is not reversible.
Oh God. You know, another one I was going to ask about, which I think is, I've heard sort of mixed mythology around, and I'd love for you to clear this up. You know, so I've been at friends' houses when they've given their dogs bones, and I know that that's like another classic sort of cartoon thing of the dog toting around a bone, which makes it look okay. But I've heard that, you know, that there's a distinction between a raw bone and a cooked bone, or is it just like we should avoid bones altogether?
I truly feel that bones should be avoided altogether. There's always going to be mixed opinions amongst veterinarians, just like in any industry, there's always going to be those differing opinions. But I guess, you know, no one can contest the fact that bones can cause a foreign body obstruction. You know, in themselves, you know, if chunks of them are swallowed, you know, some dogs are very enthusiastic and they will swallow giant chunks of bone without properly chewing them. So there's that risk. Then there's the fact that the shards of the bone can cause intestinal damage. You know, they can literally lacerate and puncture the intestinal lining, and that in itself, you know, is a critical concern. And then, you know, in terms of cooked versus raw, I mean, raw bones, they can, you know, being that they're raw, they can carry things like, you know, Salmonella, E. coli. That's always going to be a risk whenever raw food is fed to our pets. So that's a concern with the raw bones. And again, just because they're raw, that doesn't change the fact that they're going to potentially break off into shards when they consume them. So, you know, those concerns, there's probably a few other concerns I could go into, but those main concerns, those cover both cooked and raw bones.
Okay, that's good to know. Yeah.
For our pets, probably dogs, I'm thinking here, they had a rough day just cheering us up at the end of the week. They just want to have a brew or a coffee or something like that to wake up in the morning. Bad,
Austin,
good.
I'm getting a real picture of things at your house.
You know, Omi's it's hard, you know.
So I advise your friend who does this to avoid sharing those drinks with their pets. Yes. Okay. You know, I do recall as a child visiting our relatives in Malaysia. My parents had a couple of friends who loved their beer. They would drink beer like it was water. And when we went to visit their house once, they liked to share some of that beer with their dog. And they are very lucky that dog didn't go into kidney and liver failure. I don't know how their dog didn't, but there's very much that potential, you know, outcome. So I would definitely avoid.
So I'm wondering, you know, is one of the things you guys see more of or less of? I don't know. I mean, with more marijuana legalization coming across the country, are you seeing, you know, pets getting into their owner's stash or their owner's edibles or anything like that?
Definitely. That has increased significantly. It's always been an issue, you know, definitely not an uncommon occurrence at emergency. And even in clinical practice, you'll have cases coming in, you know, clients have no idea why their dog suddenly is uncoordinated and seeming
they
quite
have
sleepy.
no idea. It's so weird.
Exactly.
How could it have happened?
For the most part, clients do not like to reveal that their dog has gotten into their stash. It takes quite some time to ask the question in about 20 different ways to elicit the truth that you are suspecting. So, you know, I always advise clients, please just be honest with your vet. We're not going to call the authorities on you. We just want to fix your pet. We need to know why they are not acting normally. We need to know that it isn't some other kind of toxin that we need to, you know, immediately administer an antitoxin for. So, you know, if we know that it's marijuana that your dog has accidentally consumed, you know, for most cases it is by accident. The dog is the one who has been able to find the stash, especially now that there's a lot more availability of edibles. You know, back in the day when it was just the raw plant, you know, not as many dogs are necessarily going to be attracted to that. But when it's in a delicious form of brownies or any kind of candy, then there's a much higher risk.
Then you've got like a chocolate and marijuana risk in the brownie.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And maybe nuts in the brownie. What about nuts? What about nuts?
Gosh. Can you imagine if it was a walnut macadamia
Right.
brownie?
The trifecta of bad. Yeah.
Yes. That would be the ultimate thing you would not want to ever give to your pet. So nuts in general, I just kind of avoid because they are high in fat. And as I mentioned earlier, that can be a risk for developing pancreatitis, which is not fun to deal with. It does require extensive treatment. But the particular nuts to really take note of are macadamias and walnuts.
Is there something in those nuts that makes them particularly bad?
Yeah, so macadamias can basically cause things like seizures in higher quantities. They can even cause paralysis of the hind limbs. And they really have to be rushed straight to the emergency hospital. And whereas things like walnuts in themselves aren't the main issue. It's that they can be at risk of containing mycotoxins, just because if they get moldy, they can have mycotoxins, which are certainly poisonous to pets. So just, as a general rule, just avoid nuts. It makes it so much easier.
Yeah. Dr. Nguyen, we've spoken a lot about human food that we're giving our animals, intentionally or unintentionally. But what about if you have both cats and dogs in terms of their own food? Can dogs eat cat food and cats eat dog food, or what's the situation with that?
That's such a great question, because you'll have those clients come in and they'll say, "Oh yeah, Fluffy loves eating, Bobo's cat food. Like he always sneaks into her cat food." And then I have to explain to the owner, I'd avoid that situation happening again, because cat food is very much higher in fat content. And at that level, dogs can't really tolerate it. And once again, that can be a risk factor for pancreatitis. So we really want to avoid cat food being given to dogs as much as they love it. For whatever reason, probably the fat content, it does add palatability. They love cat food. They will try to get into your cat's cat food oftentimes. I've had a lot of clients mention that. I've seen that exhibited in my own pets as well. So, I would avoid that situation.
Right.
So I think I know the answer to this, because I have a personal bias here. I mentioned that we have an incredibly picky Chihuahua, but we also have a Beagle who is essentially a canine garbage disposal. She's like a goat.
Oh my God.
My prediction when I ask you this question is that I know the answer to it. But if you had to say which animal, cats or dogs, you see in your office is more over having eaten something they shouldn't have, like which is the animal?
Yeah, dogs win every time. Absolutely.
Probably Beagles especially.
Yeah, Beagles are, they're definitely a common offender for sure.
Yeah. Food motivated.
Absolutely.
They do love, and they have those hound noses. They can find their way into the. You could have hidden it, but they'll find it.
Yeah. Yep.
That's a good
The very
point.
first thing in our house that the Chihuahua liked and the Beagle was not interested in was cicadas. It was very weird. Yeah. Beagle was not interested.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Not interested.
True. Yeah. He's like, I tried them all. That's not exciting to me.
Nope, not good.
That's such a diss. That's such a.
I know, right?
You'll eat anything. But anyway.
Right? Oh gosh.
So we've talked about, rush them into the vet. So if a crisis or an emergency is happening right now, just so that we can kind of be very clear about the procedure here, what should somebody do immediately if they've suspected something has been ingested?
Right. So I would do one of two things, or one of three things. If you can just rush them straight to emergency, that is your best bet, because it's really some of these toxins, it's about the timing. And, the quicker they can be detoxified, whether through specific medications that they need, things like activated charcoal or fluids, the sooner those get into them, the more likely that they will be to survive it. So, things like that. And I definitely, if you're really uncertain and you feel like, if it's one of the foods that I've mentioned that isn't necessarily deadly, but can cause some issues, and they've consumed like the most minuscule amount, I mean, you could always call your local emergency clinic first and just give them a heads up. And also it's good to give them a heads up that you're on your way sometimes. So if you have another person in the car, I always recommend just giving them a heads up, because the sooner they can also get your details into their system, the sooner they can start those life-saving treatments. Thirdly, there is something that's an amazing resource, and I think a lot of vets would agree with me on this, is the Aspca poisons hotline. That is something you can find, online. If you Google Aspca poisons, it's going to come up right away. And you can actually do a paid telemedicine consult with their, specialists in toxicology. They're manning those lines 24 hours a day. With both of these industries, the online phone and actual physical emergency hospitals, just be prepared that there is going to be a wait as of recently. With the pandemic, COVID-19, there's just been, an influx of patients. And, there's every vet clinic, every emergency hospital that I know of has been inundated. So if you call up your emergency hospital and they can't see you for a few hours, then just definitely consider that Aspca poisons control hotline. And likewise, if you decided that you wanted to consult with the Aspca poisons hotline first and you've been on hold for half an hour, I wouldn't continue waiting. I really would rush them straight to emergency.
Well, I love this episode. This is a wonderful episode, a great conversation. Dr. Woon, was there anything else that you wanted to mention that we might have missed questions wise, or any final words that you wanted to leave with folks?
I guess what I would recommend to clients is, if in doubt, just bring them to emergency or call that hotline. You never want to assume, you never want to wait, because you just never know, especially with those individual differences.
Absolutely. All right. Well, Dr. Sy Woon, a practicing veterinarian and Florida representative of the Humane Society Veterinary Medical Association. Dr. Woon, thank you so much for sitting down to chat with us today.
Thank you, and good luck with my duckling.
Thank you so much. I'll keep you guys updated. It was my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me to be involved.
Absolutely. Absolutely. To find out about what foods keep your furry companion happy and healthy, be sure to head to humanesociety.org for more information. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you next time on Humane Voices.